Hello and welcome to week 2 of biopsychology, and off we go. Here we are talking finally about chapter 1, the major issues associated with biopsychology. What you're going to experience, particularly if you are spending time in the textbook, is that this book, this course, takes all of psychology and very overtly, very upfront says, we're going to try to explain the entire human experience with biology. And what you're introduced to in this particular chapter is that particular philosophy, viewpoint, however you would like to see it. And today's assignments are really going to challenge that for you. So there's a discussion and there's a quiz. Now, the discussion has to do with a very old discussion that's actually sort of coming around as a new topic of discussion in the world today. In the beginnings of the field of psychology and its origins in philosophy and its borrowing from biology, Western thinking came up with the idea of what's called dualism, and that the brain or the mind is different than the body and they're separated from each other, that the mind or the soul inhabits the body and they're treated largely separate from each other. Now, prior to that time, we didn't believe that. And we're coming around to a period of time now where we kind of question the very, very fundamental separation of those two things. So we're looking at mind-body. In fact, if you're taking any mental health classes, one of the mental health domains is actually called mind-body, which is reasserting, returning to a previous point of view that we had prior to the invention of dualism that says our mind and body are connected. That this idea of our mind has the ability to influence our body, and our body has the influence on our mind. So nutrition affects the way we feel affects the way we exercise affects the way we process food, the way we process food in our gut explains some of our thought processes. I mean, that's becoming increasingly intertwined between the physiology that we are and the concept of mind. This is a discussion to explore those things. Many of us, and this is where really dualism comes from, many of us experience dualism, that we can actually be observers of our own life. We can observe our body, let's say, in action, and it feels somewhat separate. That mindness seems to be able to separate itself from our body, yet the connection is much more significant than that experience would entail. And the more we're learning about that today, the more important that's becoming for the applications of psychology in wellness and health. So let's have a good discussion about that whole idea. The second one, the quiz, sorry, not the second one, but the quiz, the other thing you need to do, this is a tough one. And it's a tough one only because I'm asking you to really kind of think a bit, basically taking 4 different perspectives on one single thing. So I'm asking you to consider the observed human behavior of recalling a memory, remembering something, remembering where you left your glasses, or remembering what somebody looked like so that when you meet them again, you understand that they're a friend, or they're not, or, the process of being able to do that. Now, we go back to what I said right at the beginning of this lecture, that this book, this course, takes on the challenge to explain everything through biology. So the 4 questions that are in this quiz take the 4 ways in which biopsychology tries to explain human behavior, 4 methods or 4 perspectives that it takes. I'm going to take a little time, in addition to the material that I put into the course book, to explain each one of these, what each one of these are. And let me think of another, let's say, my ability to recognize I'm thirsty. Okay, I'm going to look at that. And we're going to look at this from 4 different perspectives. So as biopsychologists stuck in the realm of explaining everything biologically, we can do this in 4 ways. First, the physiological explanation. We can explain thirst because we have mechanisms within our body, physiological parts of our nervous system that are keyed toward the balance of fluids in our body that send signals to our brain indicating that we need more fluids, which then produce the thirst drive. You would look that up and you would explain my capacity to recognize that I am thirsty using those biological systems in my body. That's the physiological explanation. Set that aside. The next one is the ontogenetic explanation. This is truly the developmental perspective. Now, if you've taken developmental psych and you come across my notion of the developmental perspective, it's that things change over time. And they change over time as a result of experience and learning, which is nurture. And they change over time because of our changing genetic expression. So the ontogenetic explanations are developmental in nature, and therefore reveal learning and change over time. Now, to look at this from the perspective of my emerging genetics is my ability to know that I'm thirsty was intact right at the beginning of my life, but I did not have the skill set of being, or the physiology to be able to answer that and address that need independently. So I simply cried. So we're kind of like moving away, and when we look at it developmentally, early on, somewhere along the line, I learned to connect that internal feeling that I was having to behaviors that were being taught to me in my world. So first I was given the word thirsty to identify that feeling that I have, and then I was shown through my cultural upbringing where I can go to solve that problem. Now, I might have been some things I don't drink and some things I do. And the decision on how I'm going to actually exercise my agency, my ability to impact my world, would depend on how I learned to satisfy that feeling that I need fluids. So we have the physiological explanations. I have mechanisms that trigger responses in my brain. Secondly, early in life, I didn't have that. Genetically, it was there, but I didn't know what to do about it. I had to learn that through experience in my world. So a large cultural influence on how I address my particular need for fluids. Then it comes along the evolutionary perspective, and that is, to what degree does my capacity to recognize when I'm thirsty, and let's include some ontogenetic in there, and learn where the water is, those capacities to say I'm thirsty, and I can remember, this kind of deals with the other one, I can remember where to go get the water, and that's when I need to drink. At one point, if we imagine this along an evolutionary timeline, what advantage did that give me such that my genetics were more likely to survive and continue to perpetuate into the future of the species? Was it advantageous that I could recognize that I was thirsty and have that feeling, and then live in a world that allows me to explore options to address that? So there's your evolutionary perspective. And then finally, the functional perspective, and that's sort of like the day-to-day today one. You can actually see it that way. Of course, at any given point of time, being able to recognize that you need fluids, and society has told you what fluids are okay to drink. Now we're looking at, I am able to do that because it serves a vital function in maintaining my survival, my individual survival, not my genetic survival as in the evolutionary perspective, but my individual survival and function in my world, that I'm able to recognize when I'm thirsty and therefore act in my world today to get fluid so I can continue to function as a human being. Now, with those examples, the other examples that are in the textbook, the examples that are in the course book, I'm asking you to do that same sort of analysis of each one of those using the capacity to recall a memory. We can look at all kinds of things this way, all kinds of behaviors. You can look at it and explain those behaviors from these 4 different perspectives. Take your time with it. Review it, make sure they're distinct from one another, although they can relate to one another, but make sure each perspective is different. And what that gives you is the idea as to what the options are for the author of this material to be able to explain what we observe in human behavior entirely encompassed in the world of biology. So, enjoy this first chapter. Looking forward to that quiz and the creative ways in which you can come up with explaining how we are, the recalling a memory and why that's so cool that we had the ability to do that. So, have a great week, and I'll see you in the discussions.